Welcome back as we have another episode of The Wonder of the Bible. Today, as you see, we're going to be talking about the word Emmanuel. As always, we are using the Lexham English Bible, and we're asking the question, what does a story, or stories in the case of today, reveal about the nature of Yahweh's interaction with people? So, Emmanuel, God with us. Such an amazing concept and such an amazing phrase. Today we're going to spend time, we're going to trace this idea throughout Scripture. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and He walked with Adam and Eve in the garden. And they could truly, it's been a while since we talked about this. And if you didn't, or you didn't hear it, or you want to go back and refresh some of the ideas, you can follow go back in the playlist, right? First week. But have you ever really thought about this idea that Yahweh once had an appointed time where he walked and talked with Adam and Eve? Is that really ever sunk in? What kind of excitement was there each day to have Yahweh come and focus on you? Every day he would come, and it would be Emmanuel, God with us. What a glorious experience. You know what? I can't wait. Someday, Eden will be restored, heaven will be remade, earth will be remade. We will have the opportunity to spend time with Yahweh every day. And the really cool bit, He can devote time to each of us simultaneously. We don't have to wait in line or share. Pretty cool. But as we remember, there was the fall. Sin broke that experience, and no one could say, God with us. Yes, Yahweh did appear to people and gave his blessing to folks. We've seen this now for quite a few weeks, right? And yet, it wasn't the same. There wasn't the same God with us. Yahweh was present, he was involved, and he was shepherding his will. But you wouldn't really say Emmanuel, not like Adam and Eve had, where God was there with them, talking and interacting with them. Remember Abraham? Yahweh came to him over and over again. But you remember that there were times where it would be, at least in the record that Moses provides us, it would be a decade between God's visits. And in those times, would he be saying, Emmanuel, God with us? No, not really. No. To be clear, God is everywhere. He's omnipresent. But there's this concept under Emmanuel that this nearness, this presence, this God is right here and I am interacting with him. And so time would pass. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, and then comes the smoke and the fire. As we looked at last week, Yahweh dramatically destroyed Egypt. He thrust the Israelites out out of Egypt and into the wilderness. And then, one of the most amazing things, he becomes manifest as a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. And it was again Emmanuel, God with us. Everywhere they turned, they could look back and see God was with them. Right there, in the midst of the camp, all the time. He didn't go away on a journey. He didn't take a nap. He was here, leading like a shepherd. And he did more than just tell them where to go and where to stop. He cared for their physical needs, food, shelter, water, protection. At the end of 40 years, Moses records, that their shoes hadn't even worn out. I would like a pair of those shoes. I digress though. See, Yahweh didn't just care for them physically, He did so much more. He did the best of all, He provided for their souls. You know, when the Chronicles of Narnia came out, C.S. Lewis becomes the center of this debate. The books became very big all around the world. And this would be the 1950s. Christians tried to allegorize the work. Everything in it had to be about some theme from the Bible. And the secularists would respond, no, 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 none of that's true. You see, this is just a fantasy. Finally, C.S. Lewis had to wade in and say, you're all wrong. He said, I had an image of a fawn with an umbrella in the woods with snow, and I had to write a story about it. One thing led to another, and out comes the Chronicles of Narnia. He said the secularists were wrong. His work did have biblical themes. But the Christians were also wrong. He hadn't set out to make an allegory. Generally speaking, the biblical connections happened because Lewis was a Christian. Because he thought like a Christian, he constructed a Christian world. He couldn't help it. And there were points where he said, as a child, it would have helped me to have thought about the world in certain ways, to have certain ideas that would have helped me see and understand the gospel. So he left breadcrumbs within his work so that a child would have a framework for which to eventually hear the gospel and respond to it. But the story was the point, not the gospel. There was just groundwork being led. The point I want to make here is this debate raged at all because Lewis couldn't help but writing a world, this fantasy world, writing this story that reflected how he saw the world, how he understood the world to be as a believer. And in the same way, Yahweh provides for Israel's spiritual needs. See, everything, everything in the world, a book, a board game, the universe itself has rules and principles that govern how it works correctly. Without those rules and structure, things would be nonsensical. Yahweh created the universe just like this, and those rules, they are aligned with his very nature and character. Mankind, after the fall, were so twisted inside that the governing rules for life in this universe seem absurd, frankly. You see, um, mankind's moral compass is so twisted around that what looks like up is actually down, what looks like right is left, what is morally good we see as wrong. Everything mankind would does do by nature leads him away from Yahweh and not back to his Savior and Creator. Everything we do runs counter to the underlying fundamental rules of the universe. Going against the rules generates pain, chaos, death. And so, here they are, Emmanuel, God with us. He's there, He set up His kingdom, He's with His people, and He gives them rules for governing their lives. There shall be for you no other gods before me. Remember, we've talked about this off and on, right? There are other religions, I believe, would be led by fallen beings like Lucifer, trying to set themselves up as alternative gods, claiming that they are Yahweh or claiming that they are equal to Yahweh. And he says to them, Fundamental rule of the universe number one. There shall be no other gods before me. I am the true God, the creator of everything else that exists. No other gods. You shall not make for yourself a divine image with any form that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth below, or that is in the water below the earth. You'll not bow down to them, you'll not serve them, because I am Yahweh your God, jealous God, punishing the guilt of the parents on the children, on the third and on the fourth generations of those hating me, showing loyal love to thousands of generations of those loving me and those keeping my commandments. Having not creating an image, see, he is spirit. He is not of the physical essence. He is not of even the essence of the divine, like angels and demons and things. Those are all created beings. He says, don't constrain me to one of those. That lessens who I am and my majesty and my glory. It reduces me to be like my creation. And that violates the fundamental rules because he is so much bigger. If he were like that, he would be subject to it. And he can't be subject to the creation because he created it all. He's so much bigger and wiser and glorious. And he says, you shall not misuse the name of Yahweh your God, because Yahweh will not leave unpunished anyone who misuses his name. Show respect for me. The world works better when you respect the Creator. We are just dust, vapor of gas, like off your teapot. Poof, it's gone in the air. Remember the Sabbath day to consecrate it. And everybody consecrates the Sabbath day. Why? Because God rested. If you look at the rules around the Sabbath that Moses would give, and the point of the Sabbath day was not just physical rest, it was to meditate, take time, set it aside, and meditate upon Yahweh. We've talked about it in the past, so I won't go over it again in any depth. But we think about Moses or Joseph and David and how they meditated upon God, and it led them to conclusions about God and changed their behavior. And in the same way, God carves out time for them to do it. While the Sabbath was not repeated in the New Testament, the underlying principle exists that we spend time in church with believers, physically, if at all possible, being with them and worshiping God together. And we come home and we take our Bibles and we study and we learn from each other. And we meditate on the word every day, praying without ceasing. This is bringing the Sabbath forward to us today. Honor your father and mother, he says, so that your days can be long on the land that Yahweh your God has given you. We all know that life works better when we treat our parents with respect. They're not always perfect. And in fact, they're never perfect. Sometimes we have really bad parents. Sometimes we're blessed. Some of us are blessed with good parents. It's wherever you're at, we still demonstrate honor and respect despite their condition, despite how they behave. We respect the role that they have over us. Life works better this way. You shall not murder. Seems pretty self-evident. God is a creator. Murder defaces the image of man. Murder destroys a life. It is the complete opposite of the life giver, the creator, the builder of the universe. Thou shalt not commit adultery. For many reasons, it never ends well. But it violates promises. And God is a promise-keeping God. He commits to a promise. He shepherds that promise. He ensures that promise. Adultery is splitting a promise. Therefore, it is wrong. You shall not steal. Again, We know this. It's self-evident. The world works better where theft does not occur. You shall not testify against your neighbor with a false witness. No lying, no perjuring yourself, no sending them to jail for your own personal gain or out of vindictiveness. These things, law and order, right and wrong, justice, having the rules be consistent and followed, these concepts wrapped up in this. The world works better when everyone understands where things are supposed to be. You shall not covet the house of your neighbor, or his wife, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Why? Because covetousness is idolatry. It is making something that does not belong to you the passion of your life that you must obtain it. And the New Testament tells us it is idolatry. But even more than that, it is being disgruntled with God. God has made a mistake. He has made me or given me the wrong things. We see this a lot today in the space around gender and self-identity. God made me this way. I am unhappy with it. I will I will covet something different and I will chase it. All of these rules. And yet what are they? They define the correct ordering of the universe. We were recently talking in our home about the nature of rules for a game. Why this rule? Why not that? And without rules that are tested and well designed in a game, the game would be unfun. It would be Calvin Ball. Calvin Ball, where Calvin and Hobbes just make up the rules as they play. And it just becomes silly and absurd. Honestly, a game without good rules is a boring game. In the same way, the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, set out for us the basic foundational principles of the rules of our universe. These rules reflect the character and nature of God because He built a universe that operates the way He does. It is consistent with Him. Follow these rules and you'll be aligned with the design of the universe and things will go more smoothly in your life. Yes, the fall exists. Yes, there are problems. But the more we adhere to these, there will be a reduction in those problems and consequences. Reject them and suffer those consequences. Life will not go well for you. Yahweh graciously provided rules, but He didn't just provide the rules. He did something more. Unlike the other gods of other nations, like Egypt, He made Himself manifest in that fire and smoke to His people. Egyptians couldn't see their gods walking around. And here Yahweh is, there and present, always a reminder. But wait, there's more. Consider the tabernacle with me. It's more than just a place of worship, okay? It had a series of rules and object lessons built into it. Um, the rules were about how to approach Yahweh. What is it? What does that look like? And we don't just wander and be like, "Hey, how's it going?" These rules teach us that Yahweh is holy. He's set apart. He is um, completely devoid of sin. And so there is a process that needs to occur. We learn about that our broken state is not sufficient to stand before Him. Only He creates a way for us to interact with Him. We don't get to choose it. He does. They teach us how the processes and rules and symbolism here teach us that how that occurs, right? Through the death of the perfect Lamb. But it raises a question for me: Why is there a holy of holies, the holiest place? What sets this apart? Why is this so much different? Let's turn to Hebrews and get a bit of an answer. Now, the first covenant had regulations for worship and the earthly sanctuary. we saw the tabernacle and eventually the temple, for a tent was prepared, the first one, in which were the lampstand and the table, presentation of the loaves, which is called the holy place. And after the second curtain was a tent called the Holy of Holies, containing the golden incense altar and the Ark of the Covenant covered on all sides with gold, in which were a golden jar containing the manna and the rod of Aaron that budded and the tablets of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat, about which it is not now possible to speak in detail. Uh, Later it says, therefore, it was necessary for the sketches, that being the tabernacle, pencil sketches, of the things in heaven, to be purified with these sacrifices, but the heavenly things themselves to be purified with better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter into a sanctuary made by hands, not a tent or a temple, a mere copy of the true one, but in heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. So he didn't use the tabernacle, which was just a pale imitation. He goes into heaven to appear before the presence of God. Later says, but this one, Christ, after he had offered one sacrifice for the sins of all time, sat down on the right hand of God, and from now on waiting until his enemies are made a footstool for his feet. So the picture is Jesus in the true tabernacle enters in heaven with his blood as a sacrifice before the Father, offers it to the Father as payment for our sins. He, being the perfect lamb, sacrifices himself, offers that blood, and then sits down next to his Father on the throne. Because the tabernacle is a faint sketch of that scene in heaven, then the tabernacle is a picture of heaven, and the Holy of Holies is a throne room. So when Yahweh led his people through the wilderness, he was more than just a manifest pillar of cloud and fire. When they set up the tabernacle and he rested above it, he was sitting above his throne room, above his throne. This was a theocracy, a kingdom ruled by Yahweh, the creator of the universe. In the wilderness he led them, in the camp he sat on his throne. Consider then this. Look at the ark for a second. This, I realized this idea, it really changed how I viewed the tabernacle. Let's consider what's in this room. Inside this ark, we have Aaron's rod, right? So remember, there's a bunch of them said we can be equal to Aaron, and Yahweh says, put your staves down. So we all put our sticks of dead wood down, and Aaron's buds, it produces almond flowers. And, it's a walking stick, right? It's dead. No roots, no leaves, and yet it flowers. And God is saying, I have chosen Aaron. I have picked the way by which you approach me through this high priest. So the staff then represents the priesthood and how one approaches the Father. Later, Christ would be the priest. But he is saying, I have a priesthood, there is a way. You can approach me through my method. There's the pot of manna. So under this throne, we have an approach. We have now provision, where God, a representative of how God cared for their physical needs. In a wilderness, how are they getting food for 1 million people more? God cared for them. And so this throne represents that. Then we have the Ten Commandments. This throne sits on the law, the rules of the universe. This throne is built upon those rules. Those rules aren't just some arbitrary thing out there. This is the justice, the judgment, the standard by which Yahweh will assess those who come before him. We have the angels. Remember in Isaiah 6? Isaiah goes before the throne, into the throne room in this vision, and he looks at at Christ on the throne, and he is overwhelmed with guilt. His sin comes forward, reminds me of Judah, with just the guilt pouring out everywhere. And he says, I am undone, I am loosed, I am destroyed, literally, because I am a man of unclean lips. I live among a people of unclean lips. Poetically saying, I am full of sin, and everybody around me is full of sin. And the angel brings a coal from the altar, cleanses him. But one of the things that stands out is that there are these angels praising God, setting apart to how amazing he is. We see it again in Revelation and other visions of the throne room. We see angels sitting around the throne. And that is what we see before us and what is a part of this seat, right? What is that last seat, last part, right? It's the seat itself where God sits. And it is called the mercy seat. That is so cool. You would expect a throne that is built on this justice and righteousness of the law to be un to be rigid and firm, and it is. But there's the provision, there's the access, and now there is mercy. He is a righteous God who will hold all men accountable, but he also has mercy for his people. He recognizes our weak and broken frame. He understands our twisted moral compass, and he himself will provide a way to access him, a sacrifice. What an amazing concept, right? Israel could say, Emmanuel, God with us. He ruled and sat there with them. But he didn't just rule with the rod of iron. It was coated in mercy, compassion, and love for his people. This, of course, translated into this temple several centuries later. Solomon builds a temple out of Yahweh's throne on Mount Zion. Every civilization has their temple where their gods lived and ruled, but these are pale shadows. These are just imitations of the true God who dwelt and ruled amongst his chosen people. There are many passages that refer to Mount Zion as Yahweh's mountain, where Yahweh dwells. Israel certainly understood this to be representative of his home, the house of God, literally. This brings into sharp focus what Yahweh says to Samuel. Remember, the people have come to him and said, we want a king. You're a judge. Samuel's the last of the judges, kind of the first of the prophets. Says, we want a king like everyone else. So Yahweh says to him, listen to the voice of the people concerning all they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Like all the deeds they have done from the day I have brought them up from Egypt until this day, they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. You see what's going on? These people have the throne room of God. They have God dwelling with them. He's not out there among the stars. He's not sitting in heaven, just kind of omnipresent in this vague way. He is omnipresent. He is everywhere, even though we can't see him. He's right there. There's his seat. There's his throne room. They get this idea and they reject it. I don't understand it. It's so absurd. But then, they didn't know Yahweh. They were not a new creation. They did not have a new man within them. They had the throne, they know this, and they wanted something else. They wanted to replace their divine king with a human king. I don't know, maybe they just wanted somebody who was corruptible. Someone who could be convinced to see things their way, because that whole justice thing wasn't working out for what they wanted. Later, Ezekiel, Yahweh says to him, "Son of man, do you see what they are doing? Great detestable things that the house of Israel is committing here, so as to drive me from my sanctuary? And yet you will see again greater detestable things." What's happening in Ezekiel, God brings him to Jerusalem in a vision, and he sees an idol by the altar. And he goes into, Yahweh says, dig through this wall, and he goes into the holy place, and he sees the 70 elders of Israel all standing before their own personal idol, worshiping idols in God's throne room. Should make you livid. Just the amazing amount of disrespect and hatred to Yahweh, who has done so much for them. Yahweh isn't far away, people. This isn't just some building where they do sacrifice. This is his palace. They're actively rebelling in his home. They're attempting to drive him out. They want him to go away. He constrains them with these rules, and they don't like it. You've heard of the issues around squatters' rights? How they move into an empty home and then claim ownership? It's absurd, but in some places they have more rights than the homeowner. Imagine, if you will, if the squatters didn't just take over an empty house you had to sell, but your house you're in, and they tried to drive you out of it legally. It would be infuriating. Yet this is exactly what they did to Yahweh. They have false gods and are worshiping them within Yahweh's temple. Yahweh frequently uses the analogy of marriage, so I will. This would be as if one spouse brings a date home right in front of the kids and their spouse to hang out in their house. Should make you livid with righteous anger. And this is exactly what these men are doing to the creator of the universe. They have Emmanuel, God with us, literally. And this is what they are doing him. They don't want Emmanuel, they want Baal, Molech, Ashtoreth, Marduk. Fallen, created and fallen spirits, all of them. That's who they want and for whom they wish to evict Yahweh. Yahweh creates, he builds, he shepherds, he's kind. These gods demand adultery, murder, infanticide as worship. These gods encourage covetousness, stealing, and lying. They break all of those 10 rules. And they demand the same from their worshippers. Despite being able to say, Emmanuel, God with us, they push out the creator of all things for his twisted and fallen creation. And Yahweh departs. He gives them their wish. No longer can they say, Emmanuel, God with us, for which they rejoice, frankly. Again, mankind has rejected Emmanuel, and again, mankind has rejected God with us. Have you ever been in a very quiet place? Silence can truly sound deafening. The people think they have it made. It's if only those pesky prophets would be silent. Yahweh brings down judgment on his people. They are effectively destroyed. Just a remnant remains. He grants them access back to the land, and they begin to seek after him. They build a new temple. Never again would Israel pursue idolatry like they did before. But God's words, they dried up. For 400 years, there was no word from the Lord, and the people sat for the first time with nothing. No Emmanuel, no God with us, no God speaking through someone, just silence. Behold, a virgin will become pregnant and will give birth to a son, and they will call his name Emmanuel, which is translated, God with us. The skies tear open, and Yahweh is born as a man. God with us. Amazing. Born in a manger. Sacrificed. Ascended. Despite the initial popularity of the one who could feed and heal and raise the dead, for a third time, Emmanuel is rejected. We started this series talking about a love story, God pursuing his people. We can clearly see this. Yahweh created Adam and Eve, and in love, he's walking with them. They reject him. He offers them hope, promise, the serpent slayer. Yahweh redeems Israel from captivity in Egypt. And he sets up his throne with them. He is manifest with them. And they reject him and they drive him out. Yahweh becomes a man. And they sacrifice him on the cross. And rejoice over their victory over God. And yet, he keeps coming. He always comes back. He always pursues. He is always seeking to redeem those enemy soldiers, the enemy combatants who are fighting him, us, and redeem us to be his adopted children. Isn't it cool? Seriously. Does your heart not burst? I want to be clear on something. Some people get this idea that Yahweh has been thwarted by mankind and Lucifer and the fallen angels. No, no, not true. He pursues in love, but everything is working according to his glorious plan. We recently discussed how how Yahweh worked discreetly, even through the sin of people, to accomplish his will. Same thing is happening here. Yahweh allows Adam and Eve to rebel. And he does it because he has a plan. I will put hostility between you and between the woman, and between your offspring and between her offspring. He will strike you in the head and you will strike him on the heel. He has a plan to destroy the rebels, the serpent and his followers. And Yahweh, it, it's one thing to create something that says mechanically, you're wonderful, you're wonderful, you're wonderful. It's another thing to create something that says, I have the option to reject you, and I choose instead to love you. So he gives them this ability. But it wasn't like, oh, I hope they do right. He knew they would fail. Because in 1 Peter it says, but with the precious blood of Christ, how we are redeemed with the precious blood of Christ, like that of an unblemished and spotless lamb, who was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but has been revealed in this last time for you. The Bible, the New Testament, is quite abundantly clear. Yahweh knew before he created them, Adam and Eve, what would happen. He knew that the cross was mandatory. If he would create mankind, he would need the cross to redeem mankind. And so Yahweh in love created and pursued. But he chose Israel despite the rejection, right? And why? Because we learn the rules of the universe. We learn about his character and how he's loving and kind and just, but also merciful. We learn about us, our sin and nature, and how we like to set up our own idols internally, and how we keep setting him aside. We learn about salvation and how he has provided it in his way, and how he provided the perfect sacrifice. We also learn that Yahweh becomes flesh to be sacrificed. Emmanuel came to be slaughtered on the cross. Yahweh used the sin of Israel to accomplish his will. This was always the plan. This was love. It says no one has greater love than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. During the exile, they rebuild it. They come back. Um, Temple's destroyed. The ark is lost. Temple's rebuilt. History, the Bible, nothing tells us what happened to the ark. I'm going to assume they recreated an ark because they wanted to be able to do the sacrifices. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But it seems like they probably did because they probably recreated the altar and everything else. But here's the thing. Christ dies on the cross and the veil is rent in two. And the priests going in, because it would take time to fix this, even if they, clipped it together somehow. Every priest would go in and see the tear. And this would be, up until the cross, they were doing God's will, sacrificing as he said. But now, the whole thing comes crashing down. The old covenant is gone. They can see in that it's just a room. There's no Shekinah glory there. There's no Yahweh in there anymore. It's over. This would crush so many people because they would see a hollowness to their actions. History tells us that many priests turned to Yahweh, to Christ, in the years following the resurrection. I believe it's driven by that rent. It was more than just showing that we have now access to the Father through a new high priest. We can walk boldly before the throne of grace, not on our own merits, but on his, because of his blood. But they would see, and it would change how they think. But Yahweh did not abandon his chosen. We're still here. Christ is in heaven. Do we have Emmanuel? The Israelites had a physical throne. In the garden, they had God walking with them. In the New Testament, they had Christ walking from city to city. We have something better. I can say Emmanuel today because God is in my heart. The third person of the Trinity has set up his reign in my life. Does this not just melt your mind that the God of the universe would indwell you? This isn't like I'm in Israel and, a day's journey or two, I can go to Jerusalem to where Yahweh is manifest. This isn't, I can go visit him in the city. This is everywhere I go. He's right there with me. No longer is the throne out there, the throne is here, where he sits and reigns, hopefully, without fighting, in my heart. Emmanuel, God with us, all with us. And we owe everything to him. Broken, he mends us. Wounded, he heals us. Empty, he fills us. Guilty, he pardons us. Lost, he welcomes us. As the song says, at the cross I surrender my life. I'm in awe of you, where your love ran red and my sin washed white. I owe all to you, Jesus. He lives in my heart, and hopefully he lives in yours. The God of the universe, manifest in your heart. Emmanuel, God with us. It's so much better than the occasional chat in the garden. Though that will be really cool someday. It will be amazing. Better than a throne room a day's journey away, though. I will admit, I look forward to seeing him sitting on his throne with my eyes. Better than Christ traveling from city to city. It will be really cool to be able to walk heaven and the new earth with God. I have him, though, right now, helping me become Christ-like in my heart, living with me, never apart, never alone. God with us.